On behalf of Chen Ling, welcome back to the second class in our two-part series on Tantric Ethics. It's so wonderful to have again Gareth Sparham with us again. I'm going to lead us now in refuge in Bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And now I'll turn things over to you again.
Yep. Am I there?
You are on.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for inviting me to give this talk on Tantric Ethics. I always think of the second chapter of the Abhisamaya Alankara. Maybe it's an excuse, or maybe it's real. But there in the second chapter of the Abhisamaya Alankara, you have explanation of the path of meditation, and it says there are two. There's the Sakche Sakme. And so it's one which is, I would say, with outflows and one without outflows. And in that you have what's called a Merpe Gomlam, or some people call it resolve, some people call it belief, some call it faith, some call it admiration. And then there are three of those, so you do things, it's supposed to be Mahayana. So it's Mahayana, which is beneficial for yourself, beneficial for both yourself, for others, and beneficial for both yourself and others. So I always say, well, it's really beneficial for me. And so to be invited to do this, I can't say that anybody will get anything else from what I do. And I really hope they do, but given my incapacity and so forth, whether that will ever be the case, who knows? But it's incredibly kind to have this opportunity to go and think about this subject. So we don't have a lot of time, and let's, if we can, let me see here now. Do I admit somebody here? There we go. Let me see. Don't know what's
all taken care of.
Good. So I'm going to just share a screen here. So this is from a dissertation, a recent dissertation, relatively, an MA dissertation by this is who she is, Kelly Powell. And her dissertation, an MA dissertation, The Ritual and Roots, is discovering the history of the Vajrayana. So I was just reading through it, and I noticed in it, it has a really very helpful summary of another dissertation by Steve Weinberger at the University of Virginia, done quite a long time ago. And it gives the mandala. I hope you can see it here. Last week, very kindly, somebody did make a little presentation for us of the different places that the 5 family Buddhas go or are presented. But this is the very oldest, perhaps, of of the presentations of the 5 family Buddhas. And so maybe just for 1 second, we'll go to her earlier. This is really, she's summarizing Steve Weinberger's dissertation, which really is a tremendous introduction, more than an introduction to yoga Tantra, because of course you have yoga Tantra and then highest yoga Tantra. And we tend to only think about highest yoga Tantra, but really, as we move ahead a bit, let's call it not so much deepening, but maybe buttressing what we know. It's helpful somehow to, get different kinds of books that one knows and a little bit of the history of it. And so this is talking from that perspective. So I think it's here. Where did she put it? She's just talking about the Sarvatathagata Tattva Sangraha. It's called Deni Dupa in Tibetan. And you usually don't hear compendium of principles is often, you don't think of it maybe as being the name of a Tantra, but it's the oldest in some senses Tantra. Not the oldest, but the most important from the point of view of the Tantras we're dealing with. And so she's saying, again, probably composed in South India, mid-7th century, codified by the late 8th century. And of course, that's the time that things are really beginning to come into Tibet big time. That's the time of the first great wave of translation. And it seems to be the first place you have talk of Vajrayana, the first time you actually find that word descriptive of itself. And then you have these mandalas. So if you remember, we had Vairochana, we had Ratnasambhava, we had Amitayus, we had Amoghasiddhi and Akshobhya. Now, usually in what we'll be used to, you would have Akshobhya in the middle, Vairochana over here, Amitayus down here, Ratnasambhava there, and Amoghasiddhi at the top. So that's just to sort of touch base, if you will, with what we were talking about last week, trying to say clearly for one's practice, knowing about the compendium of principles, Tantra is not crucial. The main thing is what one does in one's heart and so on. But nevertheless, to get a grounding in the literature is valuable. And really, it's hard to get a feeling for what's going on in Tantra unless one brings in the Yoga Tantra, and particularly for understanding, as we're looking at now, it's called an explanation of tantric morality called the Fruits Cluster of Siddhis. Usually it's Satum Namshe in, the explanation of the root downfalls. That's the way Tibetans usually. This is a book by Tsongkhapa, and you can't really make sense of this book unless you have an understanding of the history. So I want to just quickly then go over what we did last time. Not very good at this, I'm afraid. There we go. I'll move that there. So you remember last week we dealt with the pledges, and we said that the pledges, these are the samayas, I've got to keep my samayas sort of thing. These are the pledges. This is where they're coming from, the parts here that are being where here, for example, we're saying VS 7872. That's just referring to the place in the Tibetan canon where the Tibetan translation of this Tantra is found. And so there you find, take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and community. This is the firm pledge of the beautiful Buddha family. And then in the great excellent jewel family, I'm over here with Ratnasambhava, always 3 times day and night. Give the 4 offerings of material, feelings, doctrine, and love. Keep the good dharma, the external secret and the 3 vehicles, and keep possession of all the vows in as much as you're able to worship. Akshobhya, of course, the great, how to say, the Vajra bell and the mudra, and remembering the guru. Those are the basic pledges. One thing I thought, and I marked it down the bottom here, can you see it here on page 24?
No.
No? Down at the bottom. Is this coming up clearly or not?
We're only seeing the chart.
Only seeing the chart.
The chart that you showed
The
with the
mandala.
circles, the mandala.
So now I do this again then. Thank you. Zoom and share screen. And now I go here. Now? Good. So down at the bottom then of the page here on page 24, I know myself, you got the pledges, you got the vows. What's going on? What are my vows? What are my pledges? And the pledges, the vows, you think I'm pledging. And, you got all these words, you know you're going to keep the vows, you're doing the 6-session yoga and this and that and the other, but it is good to sort out in your mind exactly what's going on from a literary point of view. Just what in the books did they mean? So down at the bottom of page 24, there's an explanation of just what a pledge means and what a vow means. So when you're talking, as we will today, about the 14, is that there are 14 vows, right? And you have to figure out, well, what are the 14 vows? What are the pledges? And then what are the downfalls? Now, the downfalls are from the vows. But you can't understand the vows until you understand the pledges. But the way the vows and the pledges go together is complex. In other words, you have to go back to what we were talking about last week or the week before, that really when you're talking about the pledges, you're talking about yourself as an empty person, as a selfless person. Not therefore not as a person. Somebody who says, well, I'm not hereby, is not very helpful, right? But you're not here in a way, finally, which causes the trouble which we as ordinary human beings have. How do you get away from those problems? You get away from them by actually getting rid of projections, especially projections of who one is, in a way which causes greed and hatred and so on. So that absence of that then leaves something. What does it leave? It leaves what are called the dharmas, or the constituents. And those are heaped together into 5 aggregates of things. And those aggregates of things are the 5 aggregates. And these are the 5 aggregates when you're as perfect as you can be for yourself and for others. Now, there are many ways that is broken down. It's not like every time you find the 5 family Buddhas, you're going to find them exactly related in the way I've done today. That's not how it is. As you get more and more complex mandalas and so on and so forth, they can be all over the place. That's fundamentally all you're talking about. Always. Because you're transforming yourself in Tantra in a quick way in order to be a benefit for others. And you're taking the result as the path, which means you're, by any other words, you're pretending you're perfect. And because you're not there to be perfect. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not, subtle wind minds and stuff like that, and the clear light nature and all that. All that's there. That's not you. But usually they say that's of no use to anyone else. And since Buddhas are for somebody else, the only thing that matters is your 5 aggregates, right? Because that's the only, we're not even all 5 of them, really. The main one is your form one. And that's why you'll find it broken down, the form aggregate, into many, many parts, because that's the ones others contact. And since it's for others, that's the main sort of Buddha you're interested in, even though the one you get is indeed, the things in the central channel and unbelievable, form of death at the clear light of death. All those are absolutely central, but nobody else is getting them but you, right? So don't particularly help if that's all you get in terms of what you want, which is to be a benefit to others. So what is a pledge and a vow then? A pledge, that's the samaya, because it is something that should not be breached. A vow, conviction about what you should and should not do. So here's the point, okay? As we're going to see in just a few moments, there are 14 things we're going to call vows. And these vows, how could you put it? It's not like a universal and a particular, but it's generally what's being presented in the pledges, the 5 Buddha family pledges. They are being dealt with more systematically, maybe you can say, in the 14. And so a downfall from them means that you're breaking the pledges. Okay, so so this is the proclamation. We're just following the Vairocana, sorry, not the Vairocana, the Dheni-dupa. The Vajra tip, Tantra, if you look at the way it works, you have 5 chapters in the Dheni-dupa, in the Compendium of Principles. Tantra, you have 5 chapters. The first 4 different, for example, the first mandala we just saw with the family Buddhas put in certain ways. The next one is those, but they're all goddesses. And you have 2 others. And then the last chapter is, it's a bit confusing, but it's called Uttara Tantra. And an Uttara Tantra means, how can you put it? One at the end. A tantra that comes at the end. And so it's the 5th chapter is the explanation then of the tantra. And that in Tibetan is called the Vajrashekara. So that's where all of Tsongkhapa's citations are coming from. But even though it's an explanation tantra, it's the 5th chapter and it is the Dheni-dupa. Okay, so then, we just come along here. So first then, you tell the person what the vows are, right? And then how can you put it? It's not like that's all there are, okay? Because you have many other tantras, all sorts of tantras. And so in particular, you're going to get a pledge not to fall away from the 10, from avoiding the 10 non-virtues. You're going to have pledges not to step on the guru's shadow. You're going to have many, many negatively and positively framed pledges. Often we know all about these. You shouldn't sort of like eat up a torma just like because you're going to eat it, or something which is offered to the gods, or you shouldn't just sort of like walk over a book or over the particular deity's pictures. All of those are also there. So they're dealt with, but and they're good to know, because without that, you're kind of being careless with the more fundamental things. So after after they've all been explained to you, then you take them. Okay, so it's interesting because this one will probably somewhat recognize. it's translated into English here. Sage son, fully enlightened being, please turn your thoughts towards me. Please grant me ordination, the Guru. Do you wish, noble one, to keep the secret of those of the great family? Master, please listen to my request. You know, this is, what is it? About Gongsu So. It's the sort of thing, how to say? You know, they say, please say after me, and then and you're all doing it, say again the third time. And sometimes at the beginning, you know, they're saying, I'm going to start hear what they're saying, but it sounds all very lovely, and you have the faith and you're getting it, right? And that's good. That's the heart of a practice. This is saying, okay, well, this is the book it's based on, that's all. This is where you get the ritual from. So, and this you'll probably recognize over here on 35, just like the lords of the 3 periods of time were set on enlightenment, so too shall I produce the unequal and supreme bodhicitta. These are all, now, can you put them back with the pledges? This is the beginning, and you'll now see that you just go through each one. Okay, so the actual order, in the Buddha Yoga vows, there are 3 moralities: training in morality. Morality brings together wholesome dharmas, and the morality of working for the welfare of living beings. You can't stress how central that is, okay? What is that? Yeah, let me ask. Somebody want to tell me? The 3 moralities: the training in morality, the morality that brings together wholesome dharmas, and the morality of working for the welfare of living beings. What is that? Anyone? Okay, it's Bodhisattva morality. Remember, there are three, how do we put it? According to the morality chapter of the Bodhisattva Bhumi, which is the locus classicus, as they put it, the place upon which Bodhisattva morality is presented. There are 3 aspects to it. The first is, you got to have basic morality. Lay person, monk or nun, one of 7 sets of morality. Thus, the training in morality. That's Bodhisattva morality. You say, well, wait a minute, no, that's not Bodhisattva morality. That's called a Vinaya. Yeah, right. You've totally misunderstood what it means to have Bodhisattva morality, because Bodhisattva morality isn't different. It's not some new Buddhism, right? It's now the same Buddhism with a different motive. So you think, well, yeah, but really, I don't need basic morality. I can go rip off anyone I want or do whatever. No, it wouldn't make sense, right? If you weren't keeping a basic morality, how are you going to do it? So that's there. Second is the morality that brings together wholesome dharmas. These are translations. It basically means all a dharma here means an attribute or a good quality or something special. And wholesome just means on the good side. So it means everything that makes a Buddha. So that's the practices of giving and so on, the 6 perfections that together give you 5 in a sense here, 5, the perfections that give you the perfect samadhi, that give you the perfect patience, that all of the things then that turn out into the attributes of a Buddha. And then the 3rd morality, or the 3rd plank of a bodhisattva's morality, which is just tremendous, isn't it? The morality of working for the welfare of living beings. Now, there are many ways these have been explained, but I've never heard a Tibetan explain them in any different way than the one way. That means Not that, well, that's the one where you're kind for others. No. The first one, the second one, and the third one are all equally bodhisattva morality. You're keeping the vows. They're all bodhisattva morality. And the third one is somebody's on the street and they need something. There's a fellow who's fallen on hard times and you help them. There's a person who needs some, this is the bodhicharya avatara. May I be a bridge for those who need a bridge to cross over. May I be a partner for the people who don't have a partner. May I, whatever living beings need, you do that too. But you think, well, that's it, right? Love. That's all you do in Bodhisattva Morality. No. There are 3 planks. Keeping one of the sets of Vinaya vows. Doing the meditation on the 6 perfections, if you will, in order to transform yourself into with all the qualities of the Buddha. So this is important because we'll move on now. That we're just kind of picking up from yesterday, but you can't say it too much. So now you could say, I mean, each of the vows, we've already talked about them when they were proclaimed, but here in the things, those in the great, I'm on page 38 here, those in the great supreme Vajra family should probably keep the Vajrabala Mudra and also keep the master's vow. Now, this is getting in pretty heavy, right? I mean, by this point, you're starting to talk about Tantra. And Tantra really is like, what can we say? Wow. I mean, one of the things in universities nowadays, which is rather interesting, is that Tantra is beginning to be studied in a non-normative fashion. Earlier, it was dismissed in universities as, a sort of a later kind of strange stuff, and the manuscripts were in languages which weren't so interesting, and by and large, it was shocking to people, right? Because when you read the manuscripts, when you read the original tantric texts, they're shocking. I have no doubt about it. The one we've just been talking about, the Yoga Tantra one, is not so shocking, right? It's still pretty, quote unquote, off the wall, as we might say, but nothing like highest Yoga Tantra. I mean, it is shocking. And so when you're talking about taking Akshobhya's vows here, don't forget that it is like shocking. But anyway, now in the university, people have been able to overcome that problem of just finding it shocking to read. Things like, my God, you can't believe that that's saying that. And they're not interested in being normative, saying it's good or bad. They want to know what it says. And so there's been some real headway made on really understanding, the history of the literature, beginning to get a feeling for what it is. But on the other hand, often I think, you just take the book at its face value. It can be helpful, even though then it is so shocking that you can't believe it. So it's interesting here to note, we don't have time to go through it carefully, but the part I've highlighted here says, since these 3 pledges, that's the Vajrabala Mudra, are common to both yoga and highest yoga, you should not formulate the mudra pledge only in terms of the mutual embrace of man and woman. The tightening of the mudra should also be understood in a similar fashion contextually. In other words, having the Vajra and bell, keeping the Vajra and bell to remind you, because now you've got these symbols, right? What are these monks and nuns doing with these strange symbols? They're just supposed to have their robes, but now they've got these. These remind you of the bodhicitta and the understanding of emptiness and so on, and how they go together. and no doubt also the meditational states with the new kinds of bliss. But it doesn't mean that, when you read it, no, that there, you're doing things which are absolutely the opposite of what you'd associate with the Buddhist religious. And indeed, the need in the vows or the downfalls when you're just talking to people about it and so on and so forth, it is very, very heavy stuff. Certainly when you're just reading it in a university environment without any sort of quote unquote faith or anything like that, and you're just reading the manuscripts because they're finding the manuscripts like, and so we'll see. There's Tsongkhapa is really good. He's saying, the imagination of things. What do they call it now? The plasticity. We talk about neuroplasticity and so on. These things are incredibly important. So Tsongkhapa said, no, you're basically imagining things. And that's just fooling around. That's not what the text is saying. No, the imagination of the things itself is something that one does with care, right? I mean, and so, they say it's, it's something that you're very careful about. And once you start putting your feet in there, then you have to be very careful with saying, well, yeah, I kind of did it, but I got back to my breathing, which I really find helpful. And, that's fine. But it's like, I don't know where it actually came from, but the real Buddhism, and you go on that way. Now that, they're saying, is not a good idea. And especially don't ever go there. Now, we've gone there, so we don't have any choice, right? But many people have gone there not knowing what they were getting into, in a sense. And then he's like, well, yeah. But then I went to a retreat, and, there's certain fundamental things in Buddhism, and I'm not saying it's bad, but, it's kind of like really silly. And I think people are just into sex. So maybe we are. Maybe we are. That's what we got into it for. But if you put your feet in there and you had some feeling for it, to in any way begin to, especially with your gurus and things like that, that they're saying, well, it depends where your faith lies, right? If you've got faith in these things, you want to be really careful. So this is that you take the vows, and then let's just go right on then. Now, there's a lot which we can't get into today. As you know, there are 4 sets of tantras. So the question comes, though, which vows? And vows here, don't forget, we're going back to the 5 family Buddhas. When you talk about vows, you're talking about the 5 family Buddhas, okay? Now, to what extent do you keep the Vajra vow, all of these ones we're looking at? Now, what it's going to be saying is, no, it's bodhisattva morality is all that you have the person commit themselves to in the first 2 sets of tantras. That's really central to Tsongkhapa's way of thinking, okay? So do you take no initiations or consecrations or empowerments or whatever you want to call them? Yes, you do. You'll have the water empowerment, you'll have the crown empowerment. And with those go the vows. But just think back, the rituals are so complicated. There's something going on for days. You haven't got the slightest idea what's going on. But, you're doing a Tara ritual. We're going to get a Tara, we're going to get Avalokiteshvara, we're going to get a da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, everybody now, the Bodhisattva vows. First, we're going to get the such and such vows, then we're going to get the such and such vows. Now, of course, the Bodhisattva vows also, there's 2 kinds, right? You've got to know. There's one, in a sense, where you don't have vows when you take Bodhisattva vows, right? Now, that's not to say you don't take vows, but the meaning of a vow is different. You take bodhicitta like we do at the beginning of the class here today. Until I'm enlightened, as we say. Now, that is a vow, right? That's famous as a vow. It's often called a prayer, it's often called a vow. And I'm going to become enlightened for the sake of every living being. That's a vow, right? But it's not the same. That's not the vow in the sense we're talking about when you talk about taking the bodhisattva vows. The bodhisattva vows is when you then, have that vow, that prayer, you then commit to those three sets of ethics that we were talking about, which are the ones to do with Vairochana. Though that's different. They're not the Vairochana's vows when you're just doing the bodhisattva vows. Okay, so that's what this is about. Which vows and which consecrations do you take in the different Vajra sets? So here it might be useful to know, if you want to pursue it further, what you're dealing with. And you're dealing with Tibetan savants, is that what we call them? Saints, in about 1400, living in South Central Asia, no big cities. How would have it? You think you need big cities and big libraries and that? I mean, there weren't even, there were monasteries. Where they get the books, it's like, it's incredible how these, it's totally agrarian society, right? It's not to say that people aren't doing trade when they go on pilgrimages, but nothing like the society we're used to, with huge amounts of, like we're used to. But in the 14th century, Tsongkhapa, what was he born in? 1357, right? Khunu Rinpoche, the great person who got together all, the great editor of the final redaction of the Tibetan canon, he died, a couple of years before, a couple of years after, about the same time. So really what Tsongkhapa is doing is dealing with much of what Bhutan said, not saying he's a bozo, but saying, no, I don't quite think that this is the way to take those books. I think this is the way to take it. Now, people say Tsongkhapa has an agenda. He wants to really privilege, as did Atisha, the basic morality of human beings. But when you read the books, it's not like he's just saying it, right? It does seem to be there, the vows of Vairochana do seem to be the bodhisattva morality from the bodhisattva bhumi, and the first of the three planks of bodhisattva morality is the Vinaya. And so you can't help it if people say, sorry, the Mahayana is totally different. Well, they can say what they want. They have the right, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the tradition. So if you want to pursue this further, there are translations. Wayman did a translation of Bhutan's book in, what's it called? He did a long time ago with, what's his name? The German scholar. And then, of course, Jeffrey did Navarin Chemo, the Great Expedition of Tantra. And I did this one just because nobody else seemed to want to finish it. I never thought I'd do it. It's a supplement. Tsongkhapa says, see my book on the vows in his explanation of Tantra, right? So that's what this is about. Okay, and then we get to the vows. What are the vows? The vows are have I disappeared?
No, you've got the root downfalls. Is that what you want?
Absolutely. I'm using the word, you see, usually we say, now you got to keep your tantric vows. And you say, how many vows are there? Oh, there are 14 vows. No, that's not how it works. Indeed, these are, according to Tsongkhapa, the formulation of vows. But a vow, as we saw earlier, is just the same word as a pledge. The vows and the pledges are just different words for the same thing. These ones are only understood from the point of view of breaking them. Okay, you only know them by breaking them. When you break them, what's happened? You're not keeping your pledge relative to thinking of yourself no longer as, you know, an old fogey like me with whatever I got, but I'm supposed to be, you know, imagining myself as, you know, mentally and physically as good as it can get for every living possible creature I ever come across. And even better, because bodhisattvas are almost like that, right? I mean, you know, you've pumped it up to the nth degree here with Tantra. I don't know what you're doing, you know, I mean, it really is. So these, each one constitutes, any downfall is a downfall from the pledges, right? It's not, oh, I just broke that pledge, but I kept my other pledges. It doesn't really work like that, does it? You know, it's like saying, well, I'm still a monk or a nun. I had a bit of sex, but I'm still not lying. It doesn't work like that, right? There's 4 root ones, and then, you know, so the person is a whole person, and the Buddha with 5 families is a one Buddha, right? And so in that sense, they're vows, but they're understood from the point of view of downfalls. And Tsongkhapa's book isn't called The Explanation of the Tantric Vows, right? It's called The Explanation of the Downfalls. The tsatung. Tongwa means the fall, sa means the root. So, yeah, it's a good question though, Lynn. I'm talking about, here's me talking about vows, and wait a minute, it says downfalls. It is true, we haven't done it, but earlier Tsongkhapa spends about 5 or 6 pages refuting people who give other meanings of the 14, because in the Vajrashekara Tantra, in the Tantra that we were talking about, the Yoga Tantra, you do have, besides these pledges, keep the 14 vows. You do have that, right? A samaya is a pledge and a samvara is a vow. Samvara, a vow, basically means a restraint. A samvara means like holding back. So then if you fall, you haven't restrained. You know, it's sort of like, say you like drinking. And so you really have thought, oh my God, this has got out of hand. I got to get it. You go to AA or whatever, and you're on the wagon, you're on the wagon, you're on the wagon. That's what's meant by samvara. It's not like I vowed. Who cares if you vowed or not? Have you got, are you holding, you know? And by and large, in this way of morality or ethics, holding or vow is understood as something you break, right? In other words, if you didn't need the samvara, the vow, you wouldn't take it. If you didn't have a problem with alcohol, you wouldn't be restraining. And you're restraining because you're going to break it until you don't break it. Except, as Tsongkhapa says, 1. If you say, screw this, I give up on people. This bodhicitta thing, it's a dead end. That one, that it's not just you say it, but, you know, you do have whatever, you know, we sort of intuit it, being around people who kind of suggest what that sort of state of mind might be. And we have admiration for that. And losing one's admiration in a really fundamental way, I guess that's as close as you'll come to sort of notions of conversion or whatever it is. You know, it's like you're not supposed to take that out of your heart or something. That one, you really have to think that every living being, it's not you have to, but in Tantra, one of the downfalls. So, yeah, that's the only one that you don't break. All the others, and even that you can break, they say, but if you do, and you come back to it later, it's like a billion eons till you make your, anyway. Okay, so here are some of the downfalls, right? This book is totally different. The book that Tsongkhapa uses now for the downfalls is a very late book, relatively. I mean, you're talking 500 years. But these codifications of these downfalls are just tiny little books, tiny, tiny little things. And the one, there is a Sanskrit thing which was done by Sylvain Lévy. He found a manuscript in Nepal and he published it probably in 1930 or something. So it was relatively well known. And it was associated with a famous Buddhist writer, Ashvaghosha, who lived like God knows how long ago. But yeah, it's a new Ashvaghosha, or a guy who lived 900 years. You know what I mean? And so this now is a different root text. And it's called the Mula Arpati. An Arpati is a downfall. So that's what it's about. So this is it. Having bowed with complete respect to the lotus feet of my guru, I shall explain the 14 root downfalls spoken of in the Tantras. Okay, the first one is the guru. Since the Vajra holder, I'm over here now, since the Vajra holder said that siddhis flow from the masters, the first root downfall is said to be disparaging them. Now, it is true that you'll find that, in Akshobhyas, right? You have the Vajra, Bell, Mudra, and Guru. So there it is. But it's not like, well, you just blew it with that one. You're cool with the others. I mean, obviously, if you, one's relationship, for want of a better way, with those people who are important to one in a religious sphere, if you fool around with that, it's hard to see where you're going. And in terms of Tantra, if you think what the book's saying here, I mean, you think of a Gana Chakra, we do the talk, right? And it's all imagination. I mean, it boggles the mind to think what it would mean if it were not imagination. Right? It's obviously not for people like ourselves, but you have your faith in it. And so, then you're talking about, really wanting to be enlightened. So it's masters, Tsongkhapa is going to really, well, who are you talking about when you're talking about your master here? Just what is it, the one that's going to be a root downfall? And what actually would it be? You just think, God, that guy. I mean, I used to fight, for every guru I've had, I fought with him. You know what I mean? What, you're not supposed to ever kind of fight with your guru or something? Well, what do you think the guy's doing something wrong or she's doing something wrong? You know what I mean? What does it mean? So you really want, otherwise you'll never know what you're breaking, right? You never know, I finished, it's all over. That's no use. You really want to know. So we don't have a lot of time to go into it, but the object, first of all, you have to decide, what is it? You're talking about tantric downfalls now relative to the family pledges, right? Not just anything. I mean, obviously, in any way, sort of like fooling around with the faith you have in your lamas is absurd. Don't do it. But this is a different ballgame. So by and large, it's the master who has bestowed consecration. In other words, the one who's empowered you into the mandala, right? Now, the action that causes the downfall is disparaging them. So to what extent? And here, I think I've got it for you. Is it on the next page or here? I think I marked it. No, so let's have a look here. So this is important. This is from the Bodhisattva Bhumi. This is from breaking 10 Bodhisattva vows, right? Tsongkhapa is going to say it's the same. Yes. So I'm on page 59 here. So I'll just read it a bit, okay? Let's see if we can, don't know how I do that. Yeah, well, here's a yellow thing. So repeatedly means without a break. In other words, wait a minute, I don't like what you're saying. The person's, usually the gurus I've ever had anyway, or have, they're tough cookies. You know what I mean? They ain't gonna, unless you fight them tooth and nail, it's not so easy, right? And so repeatedly would mean without a break. You really think that that guy or that lady is a bozo, and you just stay with it. It's not just, you get one little thing. You did it earlier and you have not stopped wanting to do it again. To like means to feel glad about it in your heart. To feel no regret is the bodhisattva levels, to see a value in it. So bodhisattva vows are the same. It's not just like, I did it once, I finished. No, it's serious, right? Not to repair the fault means to attach no importance out of a sense of shame or embarrassment to the fault. I've already ascertained what these are in my explanation of the morality chapter of the Bodhisattva levels. That's also in English, incidentally. Mark Tatz did a translation of that with both Tsongkhapa's and the Asanga chapter. So really, this goes together with that book. And, I've got to be honest, right? I think we all do. There's a sort of a terrible elephant in the room here. I say, well, that you have to get the Bodhisattva vows to understand fully, these tantric vows. They say, yeah, what about the Vinaya? What about the huge amount of morality codified in the huge and fundamental Vinaya texts of Buddhism? It's incredibly important, right? And, what do they say? Both for lay people and obviously for the monks and the nuns and so forth. It's not that we don't know something about them, but, these things are based on a real, having got incredible value from those. I'm not being negative, and therefore we're the most immoral, unethical, we're bozos. I don't mean that way. It's more for the happiness and for the well-being. And, as we go through a real life, what makes a life which is holding together for us? That's what the basic things are, right? I mean, that's the ones which are fundamental for what we're doing. And so they're not so easy to learn. In Tibet culture, they're taught at the very, very end. Right? You say, well, that's absurd. Well, no, presumably it's not absurd. It's, you learn the life, you're living the life with others, and slowly, you're learning that morality. As I always say, the Mandala prayer, may the community be in harmony. So we don't have a lot of time, so I'm quickly just going to go through a few of them. Third root downfall, displaying cruelty, overstepping the words of the Sugata. That's complicated, right? Because it's not saying that you shouldn't not believe things. You say, well, I just don't believe, the worldview of the so-and-so in that book. That's fine. But just don't say it ain't worth it, because for some people it has been worth it and it will be worth it. If they're the words of the Buddha, they're for others. It's not like just one thing. So overstepping is a complex psychological approach to the Buddha Dharma, informed by the concern for others, right? Not concern for this is truth and nothing else is truth and they're wrong. Okay, and then just giving a bodhicitta, criticizing the doctrine of your own or other tenet systems. giving up love for human beings, a lot of them seem to overlap. So a lot of what Tsongkhapa is doing is explaining how they don't overlap. Here he's saying, we're giving it up, the thought, I'm not able to bring about the happiness and benefit of living beings. This would become indistinguishable from the next one, giving up bodhicitta. How do you give it up? It is by getting angry at them, by not producing a special feeling of love for them, or thinking, I hope they are not happy. So, you think, well, what about certain political parties? I hope, they're going to get it. There's certain ways you might start going there. These are very, very difficult vows. Very, very difficult vows. I mean, it's fine to think, yeah, I'm going to try not to do it, but to have vows like you're not going to steal and so on. Seventh here, speaking publicly about secrets to immature beings. You're not supposed to speak about this unless the person's ready. Why? You might harm their faith. They might say, well, this is crap. Don't go around. It's not like, no, you've got to learn Tantra. It's the best thing. No. Tantra is no better or worse in that sense. It's a value for the people for whom it's a value. It's not something, if it's not for value for the people, that you show it to them. And this is interesting. Eighth is treating the aggregates, which are in essence the 5 Buddhas, with contempt. It's interesting here. I think you had mentioned last time, Carol, that you hadn't seen a citation where they were associated particularly with the aggregates. Here's one. The object is said to be the 5 aggregates, forms, feelings, in essence, or have the nature of the 5 Buddhas, and these are the 5 Buddhas. But it doesn't mean to say that they'll always be set forth in that form, but in terms of transforming yourself, they have to be, right? And the 9th, this is very complex here. The 10th is persistently to show affection to the wicked. That is off the wall, right? And Tsongkhapa says over here, therefore, this is on page 69, except in the case of the 3 ameliorating circumstances, which means that you can, transfer the person's consciousness to another realm, all sorts of things going on there. They are simply mentioned. Consider them wrong and do not do them. Right? He's talking about a vow. Except in the case of the 3, and the example he gives is Chanakya, which was the famous, you find him in history, right? The Mauryan emperor, who was supposed to, Ashoka, who became a Buddhist because of the incredible havoc that was wreaked on his enemies. And his foreign minister was Chanakya. And, it's like, well, he was doing it for good purpose. Right now, he spent forever in hell. You know what I mean? It's sort of special, isn't it? They are simply mentioned in mantra. Consider them wrong and do not do them. So, but that's not to say they're not there. My example is always, what's his name? Chamberlain, going in and seeing Hitler. He had an incredibly high status, right? He was not like you and me. The guy was like Biden or Trump. You have a different morality at that level. But I was saying, even then, for them, if they were doing it, I said, simply mention, don't do it. But then, it's complex, non-violence, you probably shouldn't be in that job. But one way or the other, had he seen the future? Had he known what was happening? They're simply mentioned, right? But, Chamberlain went and said, peace in our time, and came out, and Hitler did the most terrible things. What if he'd been in there and just somehow done something different? Again, losing the view of emptiness. Obviously, you lose the view of emptiness all the time. So this on 71, you have to lose it. You do not guard it. and for a whole day, you never think about that whole big thing in Buddhism about, wait, okay, I'm coming to pieces, but it's all like a dream or whatever. If that goes, you blow that one. So now, well, we're already out of time, so perhaps yeah, we sort of want to have some questions here, so I'll leave
Because we
it.
still have half an hour.
Yeah, but we want a few questions, don't we?
Okay.
We'll go another 5 minutes and then we can have some questions. I'm going so quickly. The 12th one is when you teach Tantra to a person who you shouldn't teach, right? It's good to say it's good, and especially in the world we live in, there's a lot of interest in that sort of thing, and therefore it's not you shouldn't say it, but this is when when there's a living being who is a suitable receptacle for Mahayana, who has faith in a particular supreme Vajrayana guiding instruction, and with a willful intention to arrest their desire to do it. So you don't want them to do it. And you employ some means to cause mental repulsion of it, and the desire to do stops. That would be, up at the top here, 12th is said to be repulsing the minds of living beings who have faith. In other words, a person who really, it's a wonderful thought, isn't it? Somebody who, you can imagine them, a really fine monk, a really fine nun, a really fine lay person, really a tremendous good heart. And you're talking about activities which are absolutely off the wall, but part of activities to allow you more quickly to really transform to be of value to people. And that person's so special. And they have an interest in it. But for some reason, God knows why a person would do that. If they've already committed themselves to the pledges. I guess maybe they don't want the person in. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, obviously there'd be a lack of affection there. Anyway, that one. And notice here the 13th is not resorting to the pledges as they are found, right? Now, the pledges as they are found, you have the downfall in highest Yoga Tantra and the downfall in Yoga Tantra. And so, well, just for 10 seconds, let's look at it. I mean, really, it's off the wall. I don't mean off the wall in a bad sense, but for ordinary people like us to think of a morality codified in terms of not doing such things as these, it almost surpasses what a human mind can think of in a religious sense. But luckily we have these friends, the Dalai Lama, late Lama Zopa, Geshis and so on, who just keep showing faith in it. And that manifestation of faith in it allows us to think, well, it's got to be good. But look at this. A tantric feast. This is a Gana Chakra, right? A tantric feast or an all-male or all-female ritual party when the excellent food and drink substances, such as the 5 nectars, are donated. Now, this is highest Yoga Tantra. It is thinking or suspecting that they are dirty and not accepting them. Now, we do all of these in our imagination, right? And usually, it's like, I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but, when we used to do it, is like, we used to get some people from Kinnaur up in the Himalayas. And when they would come back down, right, that was the only place in India where you actually had real brandy. And, so they would come down from high in the mountains with the brandy they made in their village. And that would be, when they give out the talk, the yogurt and the stuff there. I'm only joking, not in any way to put it down, but to try to convey, the way it's done in our imagination is incredibly central to what we do. But that's not to say that in the books that the actual, the non-imagination, what do you call it? The material is not the level of willingness to do things which just seem beyond a human ken, right? And that, and so then those without the capacity and those who have gone forth to homelessness should only resort to imagined partner. Again, this is Tsongkhapa. This is what we learn, right? I'm not saying it's the only thing we learn, but by and large, we do talk on, 2 times a month, but, those without the capacity and those who have gone forth to homelessness should only resort to an imagined partner. Now, in yoga tantra, it's not going to be the same, right? Okay? You break your pledge if in the gathering of people you despise the vajra and so forth. Those hand instruments, the vajra and bell in yoga tantra, are tremendously powerful, right? What are these monks and nuns? What are these people doing with these things? These ritual objects themselves are huge, that they represent to the person a particular meditational states. So it's different, right? Okay, and then now we'll go to 10 past, otherwise you won't get any time to ask. And then this very interesting one. Fourth is despising woman, whose essence is wisdom. Now, we don't have time to read through it, but what's very interesting is to see how the Indian exegetes do it, and then how the Tibetans do it. So, the Kalachakra and Dharikapa explain this relative to women in general in accord with this text. Now, what I found very interesting here, and this is, again, just purely from a discussion of ethics, right? Leaving out other issues. I'm at the top of page 75. Here, some say that if a woman despises a man, it is a rude downfall. I love this. There is neither an authoritative Indian scripture saying this, nor is it implied, since the root downfalls that I have explained earlier, as found in the Tantras and authoritative Indian commentaries, are said to be downfalls for those with tantric vows in general, irrespective of whether they are male or female. It's really quite interesting. Still, it requires a lot of thought, but it can be thought of in many ways. I've discussed it with a lot of people. They say, no. If your partner is the male partner there and you put them down, or if your partner there is the female and you put them down. But it's saying no. And I think the issue is there something which is fundamental morality, not, how to say, which goes with the very basis of reality, if you will. Anyway, one way or the other. So, yeah, if I keep going on, we won't have any time for any discussion or questions. So, yeah, it's a, you're deep in 14th century discussion of ethical systems. It's very important for a larger, the so-called 9 yanas, the 9 vehicles, or the 3 domsum, it's called. In the Sakya tradition, there are many, many kinds of literature which come at these questions in the particular ways that they do. Very important. But this is a small but important book by Tsongkhapa, which deals with the issues. So any suggestions or questions or whatever?
We don't have a queue right now, so if anyone wants to ask a question, they can just unmute themselves. And
Hold on, how do I get out of here? Oh, no.
you want to
you're-
stop your share.
Screen sharing, and I go back to you now, do I?
There you are.
So I'll just, no, I accidentally did the wrong person there. Where did you go?
Oh, we
there-
do have a question.
Yeah.
Zhang, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask? Jinru Zhang?
Yes, that's me. Hello. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about the uncommon pledges for the mother tantras as well.
The uncommon pledges for the Mother Tantra. I don't know them. In terms of the way that Tsongkhapa presents tantric morality, I'll call it, in this book, he is very careful to take Yoga Tantra, not highest Yoga Tantra, not a Mother Tantra or a Father Tantra or a non-dual Tantra. He's careful not to, he's careful to begin with Yoga Tantra, to take the 5 Buddha families as the basis for all highest Yoga Tantra. And the way he does that is by citing, usually it's the Vajradhaka, the Chakra Samvara, and a number of other Mother Tantras in tandem to his explanations. Sometimes he actually cites the Tantra, but more often he cites either an explanation, sometimes by, he calls him Nakopa, or sometimes by Naropa, different small explanations, but even more usually he does the sadhanas, and he cites something from there. So I don't know, and it's a wonderful question, the uncommon pledges for the Mother Tantras. There are many, many, many other vows, so many other sort of commitments, if you will. But the essential, be it Mother Tantra, Father Tantra, or Kala Chakra, even though he deals with it differently, is the 5 Buddha family pledges. And based on those, then there will be other ones, but I'm sorry, I don't know them.
Oh, thank you so much for the answer. That was helpful as well.
William? Yep.
I just want to greet you again, Gareth, after more than 20 years. You were so helpful to me when I was moving from New York City. I remember that time very fondly, and so I just wanted to listen to you. Very instructive as always, and to say hello.
It's so nice to see you again, Bill. Really nice.
I have a question. Yeah, and this is, I'm blown away by this book, partly because for all the texts by Tsongkhapa, that we receive teachings on, I've never really heard about this one so much. And so I very much appreciate the translation, Gareth. I'm so happy this book has come out. The parts about, I've only read the beginning but it's so rich about the 5 Buddha families, and it begins to kind of map out Tantra, at least for me and my meager understanding. What I wanted to ask though is, I think it mentions that Tsongkhapa probably wrote this book or this text later on. And I wondered, what was the prevailing, thought are there any other texts that question this or comment on it, or because what was actually, it sort of blows my mind, because the sources, like, where did Tsongkhapa collect all this information from? When you talk about even down to the ritual and how, when, whether the master should confer, give entry to the mandala, but not consecrate. That's just, it's blowing my mind a bit. So if you could just talk about that a little bit, I think it might be helpful.
Yes, the book, as I understand it, he was born about 1357, is it? Something like that. So he wrote this then when he was about in his mid-40s. And he wrote it at the same time that he wrote his, well, you can call them his mature works, I think is the way to do it. In other words, by this time, he had a big-time agenda, which was making, from the point of view of his philosophy, the so-called consequentialist middle way based on Tantric as explanation of Nagarjuna, absolutely central. And that really informs his work. So at this point, he writes his Lamrim Chemo, his what's called Great Exposition of the Stages of the Path. He also writes, they're all within about 5 or 6 years. He writes, you talk about 1400, give or take 5 years. Not much earlier than 1400, I would think. A lot of them he's in Retting, he's in that the monastery there. And he writes the explanation of Bodhisattva vows. I call it, that's the way we usually talk about these things, right? It's not unhelpful so long as you realize what's behind that title. He writes his explanation of Bodhisattva vows and the explanation of Tantric vows, this one, and the Lamrim, and not long after the Nagrim, what's called the exposition of the stages of the path, and then the exposition of the stages of Tantra. All about the same time, and just prior to it, in my understanding, about a year or so before, a small book called Namse Denma. And Namse Denma is his explanation of the Vinaya. He wrote that with his guru Rendawa and Kapchok Pelsang, I think, another Lama. And there were a great pile of them all came together in a place called Namse Deng, just near to Lhasa. And his explanations at that time are codified into that book. So that's what he did. Now, what is the larger, let's call it intellectual milieu? No, that's not what I mean. What's the literary history which gives rise to that, as well as the powerful forces at work in terms of Tibetan monastic intellectual society at that time. So it's pretty clear one of the main things is finally all the books are got together. In other words, there were huge collections of books, obviously, and people like Tsongkhapa and these other Tibetans, they didn't go down to the local library and they didn't go into, the Harvard Library or the Michigan Library, and you know what I mean? They weren't keeping them, right? It wasn't like, where were the books? So people would know of books clearly, and in Nartang, in certain places, so in Shalu, which is not far from Shigatse, and then in Nartang, which is not far from Lhasa, that's where the main collections of books were brought together for people like Bhutan, earlier than him, John and Rick Bedeltri. They went through them. And when Bhutan went through them, Bhutan being the famous Shalu Lama, he then, sorted them all out. And he put them in different places. So he put the tantras in different places. He put these things in there. He said, these ones go here and these go. So it wasn't that he made it up. No, that had been a slow development too over 300-400 years, but there was a sort of standardization. It didn't totally finish, but the Kangyurs and the Tengyurs, the huge collections of Tibetan books, that was about the time Tsongkhapa was born. So there was tremendous access then to these books, and not just the books, but people had said, okay, from here to here, if you look at a an index of the Kangyu, you'll see, let's say you take, well, there's so many editions of them, but you're going to have first you're going to have the words of the Buddha, then you're going to have the words of the saints who explain it. In the words of the Buddha, you're going to start with Tantra, and then what are all the Tantras there? How are they put together? So Tsongkhapa is dealing with that. He's not just, got a great pile of Indian manuscripts and sorting through them all, right? Nobody could do it. And a lot of the time, he's critiquing Buddha. And he's also knows Rick Bedeltri. But so that is incredibly important. But then there's another huge thing going on. And this is, of course, Dorpo Sherab Gyaltsen. Now, Dorpo Sherab Gyaltsen is the guy who's known. It's quite funny, these people come down to us today, and then you get people marching under flags, and I'm this and I'm that. It's totally okay to do so, like I'm Gelu or I'm this. Okay, great, whoever the hell we are. But, then you look at the history of it, these books and these people doing all these things. So the big guy back when Tsongkhapa Bhutan was huge, but the other guy, he must have been just charismatic as anything, was Dorpo Sherab Gyaltsen. And Dorpo Sherab Gyaltsen really, really insisted that the Buddha was not such a lousy teacher that he couldn't tell you what he meant. And therefore, you didn't need all these many kinds of different ways. The Buddha told you what he meant, and he told you clear. And there's one way to get at it, and these are the books, and this is what it is. And so this, he called it Umachemo, the Great Madhyava, the Great Middle Way. So the Great Middle Way was Dorpopa's position. Tsongkhapa really, maybe because of his, who knows why, and intellectually is fascinating. He really felt that you couldn't do it. There was just too many books there with too many things to say that the Buddha just had, the one thing, and the Buddha can say it clear enough. You don't need him given like interpretive and non-interpretive. And, so the great saints were saying the same thing, the Great Middle Way. And it is it's a wonderful position. It is, it's not one to sneer at all. The fact that Tsongkhapa, used it to come and make clear his own position, often as a straw man. He used that in order to sort of leverage the way in his work to give us his incredible vision. But Dolpo's vision was absolutely wonderful, pure from the beginning. The actual Buddha with all of its perfections is either there or not there. You're not going to get it out of nowhere. That thing is there, friends. And, you just don't know who you are. And that's being taught. And so the Kala Chakra was particularly important. And so that's why in this book, the Kala Chakra is at the end. But it is included in the Tantras, whereas his teacher and friend, Rendawa, who was really much more strongly, for whatever reason, an opponent of Srila Gyaltsen, he dismissed it as not even Buddhism, right? It was not a Buddhist Tantra. So those are the sort of intellectual background to it. And it in no way diminishes Je Rinpoche Tsongkhapa's unbelievable knowledge of these books and ability to synthesize out of it clear positions, like his clear positions on how the ordination or the taking of the vows in a Tara puja, there's not a Tara puja, in a Tara consecration or Avalokiteshvara, how you take the Bodhisattva vows, how you do it in Yoga Tantra, how you do it in highest Yoga Tantra. And indeed, probably, with the Guhya Samaja, with the different mother tantras too, there are going to be additional specific things there, which, will be specific to those practices that the person is involved in. But it's a wonderful vision of inclusivity and non-fundamentalism, at the same time not being wishy-washy, being incredibly strong in presenting his own position. But it is one which is utterly other-oriented, and the things have value when they have value for others. You get what you get from it by somehow transforming your mind into that approach to things. You then get everything, but it is done through a dependent origination. It's not there. The potentials are there, but it's not there. And he builds up his entire system in that way. And it's very admirable. But to contextualize it within the larger Tibetan society or the larger Tibetan intellectual heritage, it is really, you just wonder how it could be so big. There were no big towns, all villages, so to speak. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, yeah.
We have two more questions. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
First, Sneh.
Thank you. Good evening, Professor. I wondered if you could please clarify for me, because I'm still not clear in my mind, the relationship between the pledges, the vows, and the downfalls.
The pledges, the vows, and the downfalls. Good question. Okay, so you're talking about pledges, vows, and downfalls coming out, and we're talking just the technical terms here, right? You have samayas, you have samvaras, and you have apatis. That's what they would be, or we can give Tibetan too, but we don't need it. Now, the pledges are to do with the 5 Buddha families. Okay? They are samayas. I mean, it can have many other meanings, samayas, but in the terms that we're dealing with it here, they are the pledges associated with a codification of morality for a person who is a tantric practitioner. Now, there's a codification of an ethical conduct, a moral conduct for a person who has committed themselves, having been consecrated in a mandala in a particular way. And what are they to? 5 Buddha, 2, I'm not sure is the right word, but they're associated with 5 families. And how many are there? What is it? There's 6, there's 4, there's 4, there's 3, and there's 2, I believe. Okay, so you have a certain number of them. That's
19.
That's the pledges. Now, what about the vows? You find mention of 14 vows, samvaras, even in the Vajrashekara Tantra or in the compendium of Principles Tantra. So then the question comes up, well, what are they? In terms of samvaras, in terms of vows and pledges, in terms of the old word, they're the same thing, except one is, I forget the quotation I gave you, but you'll find it there. One is more a restraint and the other is a resolve to do, it seems, something like that. But that's nothing to do with the codification of morality. That's just using it. But you do get the word, okay? And there's 14 of them. And so then what are the 14? How do they relate to the pledges? Becomes an issue, okay? But that's off by itself. You'll find literature. Some people saying, well, you have the restraining from the 10 non-virtues, and then this, and this make the 14. Or you take these and these are the pledges together, and then you get the 14. And Tsongkhapa is wrong. That's not what they are. What are they? You understand them through the arpatis, the downfalls. Where are they systematized? In these tiny little books associated. They seem to be systematizations which come later, but doesn't really matter. You do have talk about 14 earlier, and so there's a lot of talk about that. There's many more in all of the tantras. The question came about, well, what about the extra ones in Mother Tantra? In all of the tantras, you have many, many sets of things that you should and shouldn't do. You'll have heard them, you know, so many. But we can put them to the side. Now, what then, for us, is the difference between the 14 vows and the pledges to the, pledges? It's the codification of 14 downfalls, like despising a woman, giving up bodhicitta, saying certain things out Buddhist teachings when they are, teaching to a person who has faith in non-tantric teachings, insisting on teaching them Tantra so that they destroy their faith in what they have. All of these, but they are the ones that are downfalls so that you're no longer in the morality codified by the pledges. Okay, they're not separate in that sense. They explain how you would how you wouldn't be keeping your pledges. Was there another question? A bit late, not too bad.
Well, yes, if you'd like to stop, Professor.
I'm okay for a few moments.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted you to go back and I just didn't hear the second one of the 2 kinds of bodhisattva vows.
So that was really nicely explained. When it was, yes, back when I was translating in San Francisco there, the Geshe-la explained, he was doing the Lamrim, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the Lamrim, then he got to the part on the 6 perfections, right? And the 6 perfections begins with an explanation of bodhicitta and so forth. And at that point, then comes the question of the 2 kinds of bodhicitta, which we all know. So, you know, there are many translations of it, right? My personal one is bodhicitta. I'm going to call it bodhicitta, right? that's a word, almost an English word now, so we'll use it. It's a slightly funny word to use, but it should actually be Chittotpada, producing the thought, not the thought, but in other words, bodhicitta means the thought of enlightenment, or the thought which is enlightenment, or the enlightened thought, or whatever. But one way or the other, we'll call it bodhicitta. So there's two bodhicittas. So one bodhicitta that's a prayer, an aspiration, I think sometimes they translate it, and one which is prasthana. So sta means to stand and pra means to go in front. So prasthana, I think sometimes it's juk in Tibetan, which is a problematic word to translate. Sanskrit's pretty clear. Prasthana means you've set out. So it's no longer an aspiration, you're going for it.
Yeah, engaging. I've heard that.
Engaging, yeah, engaging is okay. I don't engaging. I mean, you're kind of engaging when you're aspiring, right? So, but whatever. So let's say, so then, and now I'm just following the explanation when I was translating the Lamprim there. And so you have the aspiration, and the aspiration, you know, if you take the Abhisma Alankara is, what is it now? Sankhepani Shenunche Yanda Sope Chanchu Dö. Right? Sankhepani Shenunche Yanda Sope Chanchu Dö. In Sanskrit, that is Chittotpada Pararthaya Samyaksam Bodhikamata. So Chittotpada, that's the chitta, right? Utpada, the rising up of the chitta. Chittotpada Parartha. Artha means the welfare. The para is the other. Pararthaya, dative, for the sake, for the welfare of the other. It's giving the definition, right? Chittotpada Pararthaya Samyak Sambodhi. And then he uses this fascinating word, right? From the sutras, from the perfection of wisdom, karma. You know what karma is, right? Kama Sutra. That's the baddie. That's the baddie, right? That's the bad word in Buddhism kind of thing. That's desire. That's lust. That's the bad word. Kamata, the state of wanting, desire for perfect enlightenment. So, and they say, well, why use a word like karma? Because that's the force of it coming from the compassion, right? So that's aspiration. Mm-hmm. So you're aspiring. So what do you have to do? Leave out the tantric morality. What's the bodhisattva morality? Well, we just heard about that, right? First, leave all the other words out. What about being a lay person, you know? Luckily, I think you do have to have the 5. I'm not 100% sure. You'd have to check with the Geshe-la. But, you know, like, if you're a butcher, it doesn't mean you can't be a Buddhist, right? But you clearly are not going to take a vow not to kill as a lay person. And I remember a lawyer, a lovely fellow, he passed away in COVID. I was translating, he said, I got a real problem. He wanted to be a lay person, you know, take the vow. He said, but I'm a lawyer. I'm not going to lie, you know. And so if you're a lawyer, you know, you won't take that vow, and so on, right? But one way or the other, just those vows, do I have the capacity?
Good night.
You going to bed?
The door was open.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
It wasn't me. Somebody else was talking.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear.
Background.
Sorry?
Just background noise. Sorry about that.
It's okay. So then the way that Geshe-la put it is, you look at the 6 perfections, you know, giving. Or just have a little thought, you know, you go to the extreme of the Jataka tales. Never mind the Jataka tales, just giving blood. we give blood, we think, well, a little bit with the COVID and that, maybe I better keep my energy up or whatever. Or, somebody wants your finger or something, or they want your kidney, I mean, you vowed it, right? It's not like maybe I will and maybe I won't. There are many complexities about how you keep the Bodhisattva vows. In the Lam Rim, you'll notice the main thing is books. It's fascinating what Tsongkhapa focuses in on. I had to do that section for the translation of the Lam Rim. And he focuses in on books. If somebody comes up to you and, you've got a Lam Rim or whatever, first edition of a Shakespeare or whatever. Could I have your book? When do you give the book and when don't you give the book? They're fascinating questions, right? So, but it's a vow, right? You still have to sort them out. So do you have the capacity? And what about the patience, so you look and you soberly, so really it takes a long time before you would set out, before you would engage. But for all of the tantras, unless it's, as you were saying, Carol, introduction into the mandala, or some of the things, the kinds of things which often we get. It's important to teach Tantra, to talk about a part of our human heritage. It's, to talk about it in a good way, like His Holiness does, like people do. It's not causing anyone to, so that's crap or whatever. It's good. And so to lead them in, to show them around and so on. But if you're going to enter into a tantric morality, you definitely do have tantric morality, bodhisattva morality. That's why it's really high morality. Is that an answer which kind of explains it?
I think so. It's, yeah.
Yeah, in other words, we haven't set out really. I mean, we're just aspiring as best. It doesn't mean you don't try. You're trying to keep the vows.
Mm-hmm.
And, we do take the vows, but, one takes them and it's good. Bakchak, the Tibetans always say, you're putting down good, residual impressions or whatever. So that then when you in 50,000 lives or whenever it is, when we're ready, it just hits in big time and off we go. Yeah.
It's kind of like the intensity of the vows, this level and then this level.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about bodhisattva vows, is quite unlike vows of the people going forth to homelessness. So the Vinaya vows is they don't die. They don't stop when you're dead.
Yes.
It's kind of fascinating. I mean, who knows where we come from, where we go, who knows what happens when we're dead or whatever, I mean, we have our beliefs and so on, but, at the end of the day, we'll find out when we get there, I guess, or we won't. But the point is, if what they say is true, then there you are, Ling. And, let's say, things start kicking in. Well, they wouldn't be it would be from your earlier time, like you'd just be keeping your earlier vow, right? Because they're not like Vinaya vows, which you have to take every life. Because you say until, what is it? How did you just do what is it? Until I'm enlightened. So the vows go right up through all your lives, right? Which is why they say if you give it up, you really got problems. Anyway, better leave it there, I guess.
Thank you. And thanks for these 2 classes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're going to dedicate?
Yes, that's what I'm doing. Thank you so much, Professor Sparham. We really appreciate your being here and all the time that you've spent with us. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll go ahead and dedicate. May the supreme jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
Amen.
It's a good dedication, isn't it? Yeah, sort of context it.
Right. Perfect.
Yeah.
I didn't check. See you later, guys. Thank you.